This recording is part 2 for acid-base balance. It will go over acid-base regulatory actions and mechanisms. The questions that we'll answer include: what is a regulatory action or compensatory mechanism? What are the normal lab values that reflect acid-base balance? What are the first line of defense, second line of defense, and third line of defense against changes in free hydrogen ion levels? And finally, what is compensation? So the body is continuously producing hydrogen ions and acids and carbon dioxide, and yet in a healthy person, the blood pH, the arterial blood gases, remain within normal levels. This homeostasis depends on hydrogen ion production being consistent and not excessive, and it also depends on carbon dioxide loss from the body through breathing keeping pace with all forms of hydrogen ion production. To keep the free hydrogen ion level or the pH of the extracellular fluid within the narrow normal range of 7.35 to 7.45, the body has 3 compensatory mechanisms or regulatory mechanisms. They include the chemical acid-base control actions, the respiratory acid-base control actions, and the kidney acid-base control actions. So we talked about the body always tries to maintain homeostasis, and in terms of pH, that's the 7.35 to 7.45, and it does that by compensation. So when something starts to go off a little bit, the body compensates for it to ensure that pH stays normal. So compensation is the body's attempt to correct blood pH changes. A pH of less than 6.9 or greater than 7.8 is usually fatal. You're going to need to memorize the normal ABG values. So the normal pH is 7.35 to 7.45. Once you get that down, it's easy to remember carbon dioxide. Lose your 7, you're left with 35 to 45, right? PaO2, when you see that A there, that stands for arterial. So a PaO2 would be the reading or oxygen concentration of an arterial blood draw. And a normal PaO2 is 80 to 100. Bicarb, the normal is 21 to 28. I remember that because you have to be 21 to buy alcohol. I don't have any tricks for the 28 though. So I remember bicarb, I buy alcohol, I can start when I'm 28. I just memorize it until, I can buy when I'm 21. I just memorized that it's until I'm 28. So 21 to 28 for bicarb. Lactate. My lactate has a little typo here. Let me get rid of it. So the normal lactate value is 3 to 7. And you already know your electrolytes, 2 that we'll talk about in terms of acid-base imbalances. A huge one is potassium. Your normal is 3.5 to 5. And calcium's the other one with the normal of 9 to 10.5. So of the 3 compensatory mechanisms that we talked about, chemical, respiratory, and kidney, chemical acid-base control actions are the first line of defense, and they act really fast. The chemical control actions, they're known as the buffers. So we have chemical buffers and protein buffers, first line of defense, and they act fast. So remember what we said about buffers, they act as sponges, so they can either release hydrogen ions or absorb or take away hydrogen ions depending on what is necessary. And again, the buffers are composed of chemicals or proteins. The 2 most common chemical buffers are bicarb and phosphates. Protein buffers are the most common buffers. Extracellular protein buffers are albumin and globulins. And albumin you should recognize as a protein. A major intracellular protein buffer is hemoglobin. When the pH is off and the chemical buffers alone can't bring the pH back to normal, the second line of defense comes into play, and that's the respiratory system. Respiratory system is the second line of defense, and it is also a rapid response. Breathing controls the amount of free hydrogen ions by controlling the amount of carbon dioxide in arterial blood. Because carbon dioxide is converted into hydrogen ions with the carbonic anhydrase reaction, the carbon dioxide level is directly related to the hydrogen ion level. Breathing rids the body of any excess CO2 when necessary to decrease the level of hydrogen ions in the body. Special receptors in the respiratory areas of the brain are sensitive to changes in the amount of CO2 in brain tissue. As the amount of CO2 begins to rise above normal in brain blood and tissue, these central receptors trigger the neurons to increase the respiratory rate and depth of breathing, leading to hyperventilation. So your body can detect when you're starting to build up CO2, and it responds by increasing the rate and depth of respiration. As a result, more CO2 is exhaled or blown off from the lungs, and the CO2 level in the extracellular fluid decreases. When the CO2 level returns back to normal, then the rate of breathing returns back to normal. So remember to think of CO2 as when you're exhaling CO2 in a simplistic manner, you're exhaling hydrogen ions, exhaling acid. On the other hand, if the amount of free hydrogen ions in body fluid is too low, the central receptors sense these low carbon dioxide levels and slow breathing, leading to hypoventilation, which allows the body to hold on to CO2. This retention of CO2, together with normal production of CO2 from metabolism, results in a rapid return of arterial CO2 levels and hydrogen ion levels back up to normal again. Like I said, the respiratory compensatory response is quick. Changes in the rate and depth of breathing occur within minutes after changes in the hydrogen ion level or CO2 level of extracellular fluid occurs. And then finally, the kidneys are the third line of defense. Kidney actions are stronger for regulating acid-base balance, so they're really strong, but they take a long time to kick in. They take 24 to 48 hours to completely respond. Kidney movement of bicarb is the first kidney pH control. It occurs in the kidney tubules in two ways. Either one, kidney movement of bicarb produced elsewhere in the body, or two, kidney movement of bicarb produced in the kidney. Much of the bicarb made in other body areas is excreted in the urine, and when the blood hydrogen ion levels are high, this bicarb can be reabsorbed, because we know that'll help bring down or increase pH, bring down the level of free hydrogen ions. So when blood hydrogen ion levels are high, the bicarb is reabsorbed from kidneys back into circulation, where it can act as a buffer to buffer those excess hydrogen ions. The kidney tubules can also make additional bicarb and reabsorb it to increase the buffer effect. When blood hydrogen ion levels are low, the bicarb stays in the urine and is excreted because it's not needed. Formations of acids occurs through phosphate buffering systems inside the cells of the kidney tubules. When newly created bicarb made in kidney cells is reabsorbed into the blood, the urine has excess anions, including phosphate. This negatively charged fluid draws hydrogen ions, which have a positive charge, into the urine. Once in the urine, the hydrogen ion bonds to phosphate ions, forming an acid that is then excreted in the urine. And then also the formation of ammonium, which converts the ammonia, which is formed during normal protein breakdown, into ammonium in the urine. The ammonium traps the hydrogen ions and then allows them to be excreted in urine. The result is a loss of hydrogen ions and an increase in blood pH. The kidneys can compensate for pH changes when the respiratory system is either overwhelmed, it isn't effective enough to bring the pH back to normal, or when the respiratory system is just unhealthy. If a person has a respiratory or a lung disease, so that the lungs aren't able to compensate as well as they normally would, then the kidneys can come into play. And compensation, we'll just talk about that briefly. Compensation is the act of keeping the pH normal or bringing an abnormal pH back to normal. So we talked about either buffers, the respiratory system, or the kidneys. All can help to compensate for imbalances by bringing that pH back to normal. And fully compensated means that the pH is able to be brought back between 7.35 and 7.45, which is that normal level. Partially compensated is when our compensatory mechanisms are working. Maybe the lungs are working or the kidneys are working. Things are changing in our body to try to get that pH back to normal, but it's just not normal yet. So partially compensated means the body's trying to compensate, but we haven't got back to a normal pH of 7.35 to 7.45 yet.